So to give you an introduction to what I'm doing, my work looks at women's interfaith encounters, and specifically how those kind of act in the British public sphere. So a lot of what I've been doing is using sort of existing materials, particularly sort of the Interfaith Network really conveniently just released a very, very sort of comprehensive survey of women's interfaith work, and also their kind of online public-facing presence. And I'm also just starting my fieldwork with the Women's Interfaith Network and some related groups, looking at those kind of activities that specifically women's interfaith groups do. And one of the main things that's come through is that there's a preponderance of a certain type of activity in women-only groups. So it's often things like food sharing is a huge one, and co-creating, so crafting, all of these things like quilt making, rug weaving, knitting groups, these kind of things crop up a lot, specifically in women's interfaith groups. And the reason this is kind of interesting to me is because it fits into a type of interfaith activity that is often seen as fundamentally a bit unserious, a bit shallow, a bit meaningless. So this is an example of someone talking about it in a way that shows that this expectation of convivial activities being sort of shallow and meaningless. So in much of the post-multiculturalist literature, multiculturalism is characterized as a feel-good celebration of ethnocultural diversity, encouraging citizens to acknowledge and embrace the panoply of customs, traditions, music and cuisine that exist in a multi-ethnic society. And this is the Saris, Samosas and steel drums model of multiculturalism, which I think sort of embraces some of these interfaith activities. However, I think that we should take it a lot more seriously than this. So this is a picture that I took at the first sort of bit of fieldwork I did with the Women's Interfaith Network, which was an open iftar event, so structured around food sharing, where this large puppet was the guest of honor, and she was sort of greeted with a child choir. It was all very lovely. But those activities were the glue that was holding together some really serious political critique, I think. So this puppet, Little Amal, represents child refugees in Europe, and she goes all around Europe. And she was there as part of, I think, something deeply political. The speakers were sort of a priest, a rabbi, an imam, local councillors, and what they were saying would not have been out of place at a political rally. There was some deep religious critique of national government policy around migration that was happening, that was being glued together by these convivial activities of food sharing, of crafting, of performance. And I think that's really important. So these are some of the questions that I'm now kind of directing my research towards. So can interfaith alliances support people who experience complex marginalisation, so for example, migrant women, to make or resist change in the public sphere? So can these interfaith groups be serious forums for political discussion and activism? How do these supposedly convivial activities contribute to the building of solidarity and collective agency? So what does it mean for these activities to be the glue that brings people together? Is there something special that's happening in these women's groups? And finally, why do women's interfaith activities specifically involve so much of this conviviality? So to give you a bit of a kind of insight into what my agenda is here, I think the fact that we don't take these things seriously, the fact that we dismiss them systemically, is rooted in misogyny. I think it's rooted in a dismissal of the activities that traditionally women do. Things like food sharing is so often central to women's understanding of their own religious and cultural identity. And I think this idea that the 3S model of multiculturalism or interfaith encounter is about erasing the real political agency that can happen in women's spaces. Thank you.